The wind howled through the fir trees like 1,000 long whistles, tearing apart the stillness of the mountains. In the northern highlands, the winter night fell quickly and thick, swallowing the lone trail that led to Tom Greer's wooden lodge. Heavy snow pelted down, each large flake striking hard against the windshield of his dark grey SUV. Tom slowed the vehicle, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight, eyes straining against the high beams that were constantly swallowed by the raging wind. 4 years had passed since he left the city, shutting the door on all its noise and bright lights, walking away from his role as a tech millionaire to find silence deep in the woods. Here he was no longer a name on the pages of financial magazines, just a man living in seclusion, learning how to exist among the quiet and the white snow. As the SUV crawled over a steep, treacherous slope, a faint sound pierced through the roar of the storm and reached the cabin of the car. Tom froze. He switched off the radio and rolled the window down a narrow crack. The cold sliced into his skin like a blade, but amid the sharp wind, he heard it more clearly. A baby crying, weak, uneven, and it sounded like 2 voices. Without hesitation, he switched on the hazard lights and pulled the handbrake. Flashlight in hand, he stepped out, instantly battered by the wind, his breath turning into thin white clouds. Each step sank deep into fresh snow, up to mid-CFE. The beam of light swept in slow arcs until it landed on a small, huddled figure by the roadside. It was a woman wrapped in a thin, soaked blanket, whose edges had frozen stiff. In her arms, she cradled one infant. Another was clumsily swaddled in an oversized sweater. Her dark hair was tangled and matted with snow, her cheeks pale from the cold. Her wide eyes held the frightened look of a small bird cornered. When the flashlight beam fell on her, she flinched, clutching the 2 babies tighter to her chest, taking half a step back. Her lips, bluish from the cold, trembled as she whispered, "Don't come closer." Her voice shook, part weariness, part exhaustion. Her thin shoulders trembled with each breath, yet she shielded the children completely. Tom stopped a few steps away, crouching so their eyes met, his tone low and steady. "I'm Tom Granger. It's dangerous out here. The snow will keep falling all night. Let me take you somewhere safe." She darted a glance around as if fearing someone might suddenly appear. Her breathing was rapid, her gaze never leaving his face. You're not one of his men, are you?" "No." Tom's reply was firm without a moment's hesitation. "I just live in these woods." She stayed silent for several seconds, her arms locked so tightly around the babies that her knuckles had turned white. Slowly, Tom shrugged off his heavy coat, taking a step forward without touching her. "I'm going to wrap this around you and the babies to keep you warm. Nothing else." She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing fear against the instinct to survive. At last, the biting cold and the faint cries of the infants won. She gave a small, weary nod. Tom quickly but gently draped the coat over all 3 of them, then gathered the babies against his chest to share his body heat. Supporting her, he helped her to her feet. Her steps were halting, her legs stiff from the cold, but her arms never loosened their hold on the children, even with his support. He opened the rear door, helped her inside, and placed the babies between them, wrapping them in an extra blanket from the trunk. The seat warmers were turned up to the highest setting. Tom returned to the driver's seat and turned the SUV around in the midst of the storm. The drive back was a battle. Crosswinds slammed into the vehicle, tires skidding over ice hidden beneath the snow. Every so often, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that she was still awake. Her eyes no longer wild with panic, but fixed on the babies, brushing their cheeks with her fingers to make sure they were still warm. Each time she did, Tom's hands tightened just a little more on the wheel. At last, the warm yellow glow of his lodge's porch lights pierced through the dense curtain of snow. He stopped at the steps, quickly got out, and opened the door. Carrying the babies in first, he laid them on a cushioned bench near the fireplace before returning to guide her over the threshold. Inside, the wooden room was laced with the faint scent of pine resin. Tom tossed a few fresh logs into the fireplace. Flames flared, spilling golden light into the space and pushing the cold away. She sat beside the babies, hastily unwrapping the blanket to check on them. Their cries quieted, replaced by steady breathing. She bent down to kiss each tiny forehead, her hands still trembling, but her gaze softening. Tom fetched 2 wicker baskets lined with dry towels, placing the babies inside near the fire. He didn't ask her any questions. Right now, the only thing that mattered was warmth and the return of steady breaths in those small chests. Outside, the blizzard still raged against the porch, but inside, a haven had been built, and Tom knew from this moment on he would protect it at all costs. The fire in the hearth blazed high, golden-orange light dancing across the wood-paneled walls. Warmth gradually chased away the knife-edge cold that had clung to the woman and her 2 children from outside. Tom brushed the snow off his coat, then placed the twin girls into wicker baskets lined with soft fleece. He carefully inched them closer to the fire, but kept a safe distance. "They'll start warming up here," he said, his voice low and steady. The woman sat down on the long bench, still wrapped in his heavy coat. Her hands clutched the lapels tightly, as if letting go would allow the cold outside to rush in and swallow everything. Tom's eyes flicked over her, skin pale, wrists mottled with bruises like a map of long nights endured. He hesitated for a beat, then said, "I need to run over to my neighbor's for a moment to get formula and some things for the babies. It's only half a mile away. I'll be back quickly." She gave a small nod, worry flashing briefly in her eyes, but asked nothing. Outside, the snowstorm still flung fistfuls of icy wind at his face. Luckily, the Lamberts' place was nearby, and they always kept baby supplies for their grandkids. 10 minutes later, Tom returned with a large bag, formula, bottles, newborn diapers, and a few brand-new baby girl outfits. He stepped quickly onto the porch, shook the snow from his boots, and opened the door. The warmth rushed out like an embrace. The woman was still in the same spot, her eyes fixed on the wicker baskets. When he set the bag on the table, she looked up. "I've got some formula and supplies," he said, pulling out each item. "Do you know how to make this kind?" She gave a faint but genuine smile. "Of course, I've made it more times than I can count." Tom let her prepare the bottles herself. As she bent to lift each baby, he caught sight of the bruises on her shoulder, running down under the collar of her shirt. Not the kind you get from a simple fall. These were the marks of a violent hand. The twins fed quietly, then drifted back to sleep, their tiny hands curling as if clutching little dreams. Tom fetched 2 soft fleece blankets and laid them gently over the girls. "You're still wearing wet clothes. You could get hypothermia. I'll get you something dry to change into." His tone was firm, not commanding, but more like an offer that couldn't be refused. She hesitated, eyes wavering, then nodded. Tom disappeared down the hall and returned a moment later with a long-sleeved wool top, soft fabric pants, and a new pair of wool socks. "The bathroom's at the end of the hall on the left. Hot water's ready. Go change. I'll watch the babies." Marissa, she had just told him her name, rose to her feet, still glancing at her daughters as though reluctant to leave. Tom gave a faint smile. "Go. They're safe here." When she came back, her skin had a healthy flush from the warmth. Firelight touched her face, bringing her features into sharper focus. Deep brown eyes, a slightly pointed chin, a straight, graceful nose. He was certain he had seen this face before. "What's your last name?" Tom asked, keeping his voice casual. She lifted her gaze, hesitating, then said, Marissa Quinn." The name dropped into the room like a stone. Tom's breathing slowed. He knew that surname, Brian Quinn, a man he'd once partnered with on a major real estate project, only to pull out when he uncovered the deceit and dirty dealings. "I knew your husband," Tom said before he could stop himself. Marissa stiffened instantly, her lips parting, but no words coming out. The warmth in her eyes drained away, replaced by a taut, weary tension. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket, knuckles whitening. Her shoulders drew in as if bracing for the next blow. Tom recognized that reaction. Quickly, he softened his tone, meeting her eyes. "But I also know what kind of man he is." She was still trembling, but her breathing slowed slightly. She glanced at the sleeping twins, then back at him, her gaze searching for some answer. Tom didn't say more. He only adjusted the fleece around the babies so they were nestled closer together, then sat down in the chair opposite her, letting the silence between them burn on like the fire in the hearth. Pale winter morning light filtered through the heavy drapes, scattering cold, golden streaks across the wooden floor. The fireplace had been stoked early. The faint crackle of burning logs threaded through the quiet of the room. Marissa stirred, her eyes opening in a flicker of disorientation. The unfamiliar timber ceiling, the armchair by the window, the faint scent of pine resin in the air. This wasn't her bedroom, nor anywhere in the city. She sat up carefully, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, instinct urging her to check on the babies. They were still sleeping in their wicker baskets, cheeks warm and rosy, breathing steady. Marissa brushed a fingertip over each tiny hand before relief could fully settle in. A soft sound at the door made her start. Tom stepped in, carrying 2 ceramic mugs, steam curling up with the rich scent of hot cocoa. He stopped when he saw she was awake. "You're up," he said, his voice low and unhurried. "I made some cocoa if you'd like." Marissa hesitated, then nodded. She accepted the mug with both hands, holding it like a rare source of heat. Even with warmth wrapping around her, a trace of weariness lingered in her gaze. Tom pulled the armchair closer to the fire and sat across from her. The mingled light of dawn and flames outlined his strong features, touched by an air of distance. "Did you sleep all right?" he asked. "Well enough, I suppose," Marissa replied, her eyes still fixed on the twins. He was quiet for a moment, as if weighing his next words. Then, in a calm but deliberate tone, he said, "I recognized you last night, not from meeting in person, but from your last name, Marissa Quinn." Her gaze flickered, tension briefly tightening her face. "I used to do business with your husband," Tom went on, a glint of memory in his eyes. "A major real estate project about 4 years ago. At first everything looked perfect. Prime land, a clear plan, massive projected profits." He gave a short, humorless laugh, the kind that mocked his own recollection. "But then I saw discrepancies in the expenses, unexpected side contracts, money vanishing from the fund. He hid the books, invented excuses, and when I demanded an audit, he got angry, said I didn't trust him." Tom's gaze shifted to the fire. "I pulled out immediately after that. Naturally, he called it betrayal. We never spoke again." Marissa listened in silence, each word adding weight to her shoulders. "I knew he was trouble," Tom said, meeting her eyes again, "but I didn't realize he could do this." Something flickered in her expression. She tightened her grip on the ceramic mug, then set it on the wooden table. Her fingers trembled faintly, not entirely from the cold. "You don't know," she said hoarsely, her voice low. "Trouble is just the surface." She drew in a deep breath as if gathering the last of her courage. "Brian controlled everything. My phone, my bank accounts, my friends. I had to ask permission to see my own mother, and most of the time he said no. He read my messages, listened in on my calls, and she paused, swallowing hard. He hit me whenever he thought I'd gone against him." Tom didn't speak, but his hand on the armrest tightened. "When I was pregnant, he kept me in the house. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere, and no one could visit. I thought for the sake of the babies, I'd endure it. But it got worse after they were born." Her voice broke. "He treated them like possessions, proof to keep me tied to him." She turned toward the fire, her eyes red but dry. "I left because if I stayed one day, he'd do something worse to me or to them." Silence pressed down on the room, broken only by the pop of firewood and the soft breathing of the twins. Tom leaned back, piecing together old fragments of Brian into a darker picture than he'd ever imagined. He looked at Marissa. Her face was a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Provost, the look of someone who had broken through fear to protect what mattered most, yet had no clear path ahead. And Tom wondered, had bringing her inside last night been simply an act of rescue in the storm, or the beginning of something he wasn't ready to face? Outside, snow fell in steady silence, blanketing the pines. Inside, their conversation had opened a door. Neither was sure they wanted to step through, yet both knew they couldn't pretend it wasn't there. In a luxury penthouse in the heart of the city, Brian Quinn sat behind a gleaming walnut desk. Light from the floor to ceiling windows reflected off the perfectly tailored suit he wore, highlighting the polished image he always maintained for the public. But behind that sheen, his eyes were cold steel laced with arrogance. On his computer screen, the latest digital news headline scrolled across. One bold banner read, "Successful businessman searching for missing wife, concerned about mental health and safety of twin daughters." The article was filled with statements provided by Brian himself. Marissa was portrayed as mentally unstable, prone to hallucinations, and had run off with the children during an uncontrollable panic episode. He had planned it carefully. In the public eye, he was still the worried husband, the devoted father. He even urged anyone who saw Marissa to contact him or any relevant authorities immediately. Brian knew all too well how money and image could twist the truth. Snapping his laptop shut, He pressed the call button on his desk phone. "Come in." The door opened, and two large men stepped inside. One was tall and broad-shouldered with a thick beard and sharp, probing eyes. The other was leaner, wearing a Bluetooth earpiece, his gaze constantly flicking as if calculating. "This is the most recent photo," Brian said, sliding a picture across the desk. Marissa in a summer dress from a beach trip last year, holding two newborn girls in her arms. "I want her found before the weekend," the bearded man asked. "You sure she hasn't left the state?" "I'm sure," Brian replied flatly. "Marissa has no money, no friends close enough to help her long term. She'll be hiding somewhere familiar or somewhere easy to blend in." The second man spoke up. "We've already contacted 2 private investigator officers. They'll coordinate with us using tracking devices and local police sources." Brian nodded, leaning back in his chair and swirling the red wine in his glass. In his mind, he could already see the moment Marissa would be brought back, his children under his roof again, and how he'd teach her a lesson for daring to leave. Over 100 miles away in the wooden lodge in the mountains, Marissa was folding blankets for the twins when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her heartbeat quicken. Claire, her best friend from college, someone she hadn't dared contact in months for fear Brian might track her. Marissa glanced toward the living room doorway where Tom was stacking firewood in the hearth. She put the phone to her ear, her voice barely above a whisper. "Claire," her friend's voice was urgent. "No time for small talk. You need to be careful." He went to the press saying, "You're mentally ill, that you kidnapped the kids. It's all over the news. And worse, I heard from someone in the business. He's hired security men and private investigators to find you." Marissa's hands went cold, even in the warm room. "Do they know where I am yet?" Claire hesitated. "I'm not sure, but he got a tip from someone in Cedar Hill. You're near there, aren't you?" The question was like a needle puncturing the thin wall of safety Marissa had tried to build. She bit her lip, glancing toward the twins, sleeping peacefully. "Marissa, listen," Claire rushed on. "If you're still there, either leave or hide better. He's not going to stop." Marissa swallowed the lump in her throat. "I know. Thank you." She ended the call slowly, as if stretching the last few seconds of quiet. But when she turned, she found Tom standing only a few steps away, his eyes intent. "I heard enough to understand," he said, his voice calm but clear. Marissa blinked, trying to gauge his reaction. "What do you think?" Tom stepped closer, arms folded. "I think danger is no longer a maybe. It's on its way here." The fire cracked in the hearth, casting shifting light across his face, accentuating the hard lines and the resolve in his eyes. "Brian's the kind of man who'll do whatever it takes to win," Tom went on. "I saw it in business, but now this isn't about money. It's about control, and he's not going to accept losing it." Marissa wrapped her arms around herself, unconsciously, warding off a chill despite the heat. I don't want to drag you into this." Tom shook his head. "Too late. The moment I stopped my car that night, we were on the same side." He looked out the window. The blizzard had eased, but heavy grey clouds still hung over the peaks, like a warning of something else moving in. Tom knew that from now on, every strange sound, every pair of headlights in the distance, could be a sign of the shadows from the city, and he knew he'd have to be ready. Outside the window, the snow had stopped falling, but thin layers of ice still clung stubbornly to the wooden frame. The leaden sky hung over the forest like a heavy curtain. In the kitchen, the faint hiss of boiling water blended with the gentle aroma of brewing coffee. Marissa stood by the counter, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had been waiting for Tom to finish pouring the coffee so she could say what she had spent the whole night thinking about. The glow from the fireplace in the living room wasn't enough to push away the gnawing feeling that staying here was a mistake. "Tom," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "I have to leave." He had just started to pour the coffee into a mug and his hand paused mid-motion. "What did you say?" "I'm grateful for everything you've done, but if I stay here, he'll come," and she swallowed hard. "I don't want to drag you into this." Tom set the mug down on the table, not answering right away. He met her eyes, his tone calm but firm. "If you leave now, he'll find you immediately." Marissa opened her mouth to argue, but he continued, "I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it because I know the kind of man he is. Once he locks onto a target, he will hunt until he finds it. And if you walk out of here alone, you won't get far." She bit her lip silent. In his gaze, She could see something she hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just speaking as someone who knew Brian, but as someone who had faced this kind of adversary before. "I can hide somewhere else," she insisted softly. "With a friend," or Tom shook his head. "You're safer here. I have space, a security system," and he paused briefly. "I have a way to help you." Marissa looked up, surprised. "Help? I'll call Lucas," Tom said, pulling out his phone. "He's my best friend and a lawyer who specializes in domestic abuse cases. He'll guide us on how to protect you and the twins." She stayed quiet as he dialed. Within seconds, a deep, steady male voice came through on speaker. "Tom, you've been off the grid for weeks." "I'm home," Tom replied, glancing at Marissa. "And I need your help. Urgently." Lucas immediately caught the gravity in his tone as Tom quickly summarized the situation. A woman named Marissa Quinn carrying her twin infants, fleeing her abusive husband, Brian Quinn. "Brian Quinn," Lucas repeated, his voice sharpening. "I know the name. Bad reputation in certain circles, but he's good at hiding it." "Exactly," Tom said. "She needs legal protection as soon as possible." Lucas didn't hesitate. "All right, here's what we do. First, gather evidence. Tom, use your phone to photograph every injury she has, new and old." Marissa instinctively stepped back, her hands moving to cover her wrists. Tom's voice softened. "We have to do this so the court will believe you and protect you." Slowly, she nodded. They moved near the window for better light. Tom held the phone steady, photographing each bruise on her wrists, her shoulder, and the faint scratch along her collarbone. "Next," Lucas continued, "check her phone. Any texts, emails, or voicemails from him, especially threats." Marissa took out an old phone, her hands trembling as she unlocked it. The inbox still held short, chilling messages. "You can't hide from me. I will take back my children and others more vicious." "Save everything," Lucas instructed. "Screenshot them, send copies to a secure email, and ideally store them on a USB drive too." Marissa did as he said, with Tom finding an empty USB in a desk drawer and helping her back up the files. "I'll start filing for an emergency protective order," Lucas said. "Once the court approves it, the police will have authority to arrest him if he comes within a set distance. In the meantime, don't go anywhere alone and keep your phone with you at all times." "Anything else?" Tom asked. "Yeah," Lucas thought for a moment. "If she can, she should write down everything in order. Dates, times, every incident of abuse. Who might have seen or heard it. The more detail, the better." Marissa listened, a faint spark of resolve in her eyes. For the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely powerless. When Tom ended the call, the room fell quiet again. He sat across from her, fingers laced together. "So, that's settled. You're staying here, at least until Lucas finishes the paperwork and the court grants the order." Marissa looked from the fire to him. Fear still lingered in her gaze. But now there was something else, a fragile, forming trust. I'll stay," she said softly, "like a promise." Tom gave a small nod. In his heart, the decision had been made the night of the snowstorm. From now on, anyone who wanted to get to Marissa and her children would have to go through him first. That morning, the sun crept over the ridge of the mountains, but its light was dulled by a thick blanket of winter clouds. The sky hung low, silver-gray over the pine forest, so still that even the sharp tapping of a woodpecker echoed far. Tom had risen early. He brewed coffee, pulled on his cold-weather jacket, and stepped out onto the porch. The packed snow crunched crisply beneath his boots. He hadn't slept well. His mind had been turning over Lucas's warning in Claire's news. If he was going to protect Marissa and the twins, a simple wooden lock and a few doors wouldn't be enough. That morning, he drove down to town. At the hardware store, he bought 3 infrared security cameras, a new electronic lock for both the front and back doors, and a wireless alarm system that could connect directly to his phone. He also picked up a few motion sensor lights that would snap on the moment anyone passed by. When he returned to the lodge, Marissa was holding one of the babies in her arms, the other resting in a makeshift bassinet lined with a fleece blanket. The warm scent of baking drifted from the kitchen. She looked up at the sound of the engine, surprise flickering across her face when she saw the SUV loaded with boxes. "What did you buy?" she asked, stepping onto the porch. "A few things to help us sleep easier at night," Tom replied, hefting a box inside. "I'm putting cameras around the property, changing the locks, and installing an alarm system." Marissa froze for a moment. The thought of danger getting closer made her chest tighten. but Tom's calm, matter-of-fact tone pulled her back into the present. The entire morning, Tom worked outside. He climbed ladders to mount cameras on all four corners of the lodge, adjusting each lens to cover both the main path and the hidden angles. Marissa occasionally brought the babies out to the porch for a touch of pale sunlight, handing him a bottle of water or a clean rag as he worked. Every time he stepped down from the ladder, snow dusting his coat and his fingers reamed by the cold, Marissa felt something she couldn't quite name, a quiet warmth, as if the house was slowly regaining the protective walls she thought she had lost forever. By noon, Tom had replaced the front door lock with a new electronic one. He tested it a few times, satisfied when the alarm's beep sounded clearly each time the door opened. "Now, if anyone tries to get in, I'll know immediately," he said, sitting down at the dining table. Marissa placed a steaming bowl of chicken soup in front of him. "It's just something simple, but I hope you like it." Tomok spoonful, his expression softening. "It's good. I haven't had a lunch like this in a long time." The remark seemed casual, but it made Marissa pause. She realized that in all he had done for her and the twins, he rarely mentioned himself. This big, quiet house must have been silent for years, ever since his wife had passed. As the pale afternoon light filtered through the wooden windows, Marissa busied herself with tidying the lodge, washing fleece blankets, reorganizing the spice shelf in the kitchen. She didn't want to just sit and wait, nor feel like a burden. Outside, a few hearty bushes still held their green under the snow. She pulled on a knit hat and scarf, stepping out to check the winter vegetable beds near the fence. From his office window, Tom spotted her bent over the snow-dusted soil, tending it with quiet patience. It brought back memories of his late wife, Emily, tending small plots of mint and kale in the harshest winters, just to keep something alive until spring. The atmosphere inside the lodge was shifting. The kitchen often carried the scent of fresh bread or simmering stew. The dining table now held a small vase of pine sprigs and rose hips. Marissa had gathered near the creek. The twins' soft coos and babbling began to fill the spaces where before there had only been the wind through the trees. Lily and Rose, who had been fussy when they first arrived, had grown more content in recent days. They even started smiling whenever Tom picked them up. One evening, Tom sat in the armchair by the fire, Lily cradled in his arms, her round eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Rose rested on Marissa's lap, happily sucking at her bottle. Tom gently touched Lily's tiny hand, smiling when her fingers curled around his. "She trusts you now," Marissa said, her voice a mix of joy and quiet wonder. Tom shrugged, though the smile lingered on his lips. "Kids are smart. They know who will protect them." Marissa held his gaze a moment longer. Firelight painted Tom's features with a calm strength, like the new cameras and locks he'd installed. Steady, understated, but always there to guard. When the twins were asleep, Marissa washed the bottles in the kitchen sink. Tom joined her, rolling up his sleeves to rinse dishes alongside her. They worked in silence, broken only by the sound of running water and the soft crackle of firewood from the other room. "Thank you, Tom," Marissa said quietly. "Not just for what you set up today, for everything." Tom paused, meeting her eyes. "I'm doing it because I want to, and because—" He drew in a slow breath. "No one deserves to live in fear." Marissa bit her lip, warmth threading its way through the icy knots of fear in her chest. She didn't know what the future would bring, but tonight in this lodge, she and the twins were safe, and someone was truly on their side. Outside, the wind was beginning to rise again, but inside, the fire burned steadily, and Tom's presence felt strong enough to keep the coldest storms at bay. That morning, the sky was heavy and dim, as if the mountains were swallowed in a blanket of thick clouds. A cold wind swept through the pines, carrying with it a chilling, restless whisper. Tom had just finished checking the security system when the front gate buzzer sounded, a sharp, jarring noise that shattered the stillness. He frowned. Out here, visitors were rare, usually just the mail carrier or a neighbor bringing supplies. He glanced at the monitor on the shelf near the door. On the screen, 4 men stood outside the gate. They wore dark coats with collars pulled high to hide most of their faces, but their eyes were cold and fixed on the camera. In the kitchen, Marissa was holding Lily with Rose resting in the bassinet. She hadn't noticed anything unusual yet. Tom turned to her. "Stay here. Don't go outside." Just those words were enough for her to know something was wrong. Tom pulled on his heavy coat, stepped onto the porch, and walked down the snow-crusted path toward the gate. The snow from the night before crunched sharply beneath his boots. When he was a few yards away, one of the men called out in a loud, officious tone, "We're legal representatives. We have an order to return Marissa Quinn." Tom stopped, standing tall, his gaze unwavering. "Let me see the court order." The man hesitated briefly, then gave a thin, mocking smile. "No need. We have verbal authorization from her husband." Tom's brow lifted. "Verbal authorization isn't legally binding. If you were truly legal representatives, you'd know that." Another man stepped forward, voice sharp. "Who do you think you are to block us?" Tom didn't blink. "I'm the legal owner of this property, and I won't let anyone in without a court order or a local law enforcement officer present." A tense silence followed. A strong gust swept through, scattering thin flakes across the ground. The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge. The leader shrugged, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine. But remember this. We'll be back, and next time you won't be able to stop us." Tom said nothing, holding their gaze until they turned away and walked toward a black SUV parked down the road. The engine roared, tires crunching over the ice, before the vehicle disappeared around the bend. He stood there a moment longer, listening to the wind through the trees, making sure the area was clear. When he returned to the lodge, Marissa was waiting at the door, her face pale. "Who were they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No one you need to meet," Tom said, shutting the door behind him and pulling off his gloves. "Just a group Brian hired, posing as legal representatives to pressure you." Marissa's arms tightened around herself as if holding back a shiver. He's done this before. Back then, whenever I tried to leave, he'd send men to follow me, intimidate me, tell me they had the right to take me back." Tom's voice was firm but steady with reassurance. "This is an old tactic used by men who prey on the vulnerable. He knows people unfamiliar with the law will get scared and give up, but this time, he won't scare you." Marissa drew in a deep breath. His words eased something inside her, though the image of the black SUV and those four strangers would haunt her for nights to come. By midday, Tom was on the phone with Lucas. His voice was calm but edged with steel. "He just sent a group of men to my gate, claimed to be legal reps, but had no paperwork. That's intimidation and impersonation," Lucas said immediately. "I'll notify the local police and add this to Marissa's case file. Do you have footage from your cameras?" "I do. Sending it now." Tom exported the clip from the new surveillance system and emailed it to Lucas. The video showed the license plate clearly, as well as the men's faces despite their attempts to hide. "Good," Lucas said. "That's valuable evidence. Tell her to stay calm. Every stunt they pull becomes another piece of proof to strengthen her protective order." That afternoon, Marissa was in the kitchen making grilled cheese for the twins. Tom stopped by, finding Rose in her high chair, kicking her feet and grinning as her mother spooned her food. The peaceful domestic scene contrasted sharply with the morning's tension, a reminder that this house had to remain a safe place. "Marissa," Tom said, his voice low but gentler now. "From now on, no matter who comes, you don't open the door. You don't step outside unless I say it's safe." She nodded, holding his gaze a moment longer. "Are you always this calm?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Not always. I've just learned not to let people see when I'm afraid." That night, Tom ran a final check on the security system. Cameras were working, the locks responsive, and the alarm ready. Passing through the living room, he saw Marissa in the armchair with Lily sleeping in her arms, firelight warming her face. Rose lay in the bassinet nearby, a tiny hand curled around the edge of her blanket. Tom paused, feeling the change they had brought to this place. Once the evenings here had been filled only with the sound of wind and shadows pressing at the windows. Now there was the steady breathing of children, the scent of fresh bread, and a woman trying to rebuild her life. He knew those men would return, and Brian might try other ways to apply pressure, but he also knew that from now on, anyone who wanted to get to Marissa and her daughters would have to face him first, and he had no intention of stepping aside. Snow had fallen for 3 straight days, burying every path out of town under a seamless white blanket. The wooden lodge sat like an island in the middle of the stillness, ringed by silent pines. Tom was used to weather like this, but for Marissa, it was the first time she'd lived somewhere so quiet she could hear the faint patter of snow settling on the roof. Sometimes the only sounds were the crackle of the fireplace, or Lily and Rose's cheerful babbling, breaking the silence. Those days moved slowly and simply. Tom rose early to light the fire and brew coffee. Marissa prepared bottles for the twins, then joined him for breakfast. Afterward, he shoveled the porch and checked the cameras while she washed clothes, baked bread, or simmered hearty stews for lunch. One afternoon, when the blizzard, Tom invited her out onto the porch. He handed her a ceramic mug of hot chocolate. Warmth seeped through her hands to her chest, the cocoa scent mingling with the faint fragrance of pine drifting in on the breeze. "I never thought I'd live in a place like this," Marissa murmured, watching the snow drift sideways before the forest. "How?" Tom leaned against the railing, gaze turned to the distance. "Neither did I. But sometimes, loss forces you to walk away from everything you once knew." She glanced at him, ready to ask more, but something in his faraway look made her pause. Then he spoke first. "My wife, Emily," his voice dropped, almost as if the wind might carry it away, "died 4 years ago in a car accident. We were driving home from a fundraiser. I walked away with only scratches. But he stopped, eyes still on the snow-covered trees. "I sold my shares in the company, left the city. I didn't want to see the streets, the buildings we used to walk past together. Everything there felt like a painting torn in half." Marissa gripped her mug tighter, a pang blooming in her chest. She knew how loss could carve out a space in you that nothing could ever fill. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Tom's eyes gentled when they met hers. "Don't be. I just want you to understand why I live this way. It's not because I'm afraid of people. It's because I can't bear to lose something important again." In that moment, Marissa realized there was a fragile thread between them, born from both knowing what it meant to lose a piece of yourself. That evening, Tom sat reading by the fire, while Marissa settled into the armchair beside him with Lily in her arms. Rose slept in the bassinet. Firelight cast warm gold across the wooden walls. Marissa looked over at him. Since the day they'd met, she hadn't seen him lose his composure, no matter the tension. He had a way of speaking little, but enough to make you feel safe. "Tom?" she began, hesitant. He looked up. "What is it?" I've never had anyone treat me and my children the way you do." He closed his book, resting an elbow on the armrest. "Meaning you weren't respected before?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind whistled at the window. "Brian didn't just control everything I did. He made me believe I was worthless, that if I left him, I wouldn't survive. And whenever I resisted, her voice faltered, but her eyes stayed steady. He used violence to teach me a lesson." Tom didn't speak right away. His gaze was deep, steady. "You're not there anymore, Marissa, and he will never be allowed to lay a hand on you or the girls again." Simple words, but the way he pressed each one into the air made her feel sheltered, as if behind an unshakable wall. In the days that followed, they found a shared rhythm. Tom fixed a loose hinge on the kitchen cupboard. Marissa stitched torn curtains. They ate dinner together, sometimes trading small stories. Tom telling her about a college camping trip with friends. Marissa sharing mornings she'd spent teaching part-time before the twins were born. The girls grew more attached to Tom. When he picked them up, Lily would beam while Rose clutched at his shirt as though she'd never let go. One afternoon, he crouched down to play peek-a-boo and both burst into giggles, the sound spilling into every corner of the lodge. Marissa watched from the kitchen doorway, a small private smile easing the heaviness in her chest. But peaceful nights couldn't erase every shadow. Sometimes in the middle of the night, Marissa woke with her heart pounding at the sound of wind slamming against the window. Afraid it was footsteps or the glare of headlights signaling Brian had found them. Tom noticed. He didn't ask questions, but each time he saw her awake, he quietly stoked the fire and left a steaming cup of chamomile tea on the table for her. One evening, as snow thickened outside, Tom's phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. "Safe for now, but I've heard Brian is trying to buy someone off in town. Be careful." Tom read it, but didn't tell Marissa. Not yet. He didn't want to break the fragile calm they'd built. Still, he knew the truth. This peace wouldn't last forever. And when it ended, he would be right here in this house, standing between her and whatever storm came next. The night sky was as black as ink. Snow slanted sideways in the wind, and the forest roared under its force. Gusts tore through the pines, whipping up clouds of white powder that blurred the world into a ghostly haze. Marissa was used to the sound of wind rattling the windows by now, but tonight It had a sharper, more urgent edge, like a warning. Tom was at the security monitor when the feed flickered, the motion alert chiming, his brow furrowed. Zooming in, he peered through the veil of blowing snow. Headlights pierced the storm, 3 black SUVs crawling up the narrow track toward the lodge. He muttered a curse. The gate was over a mile from the house, but in this weather, a 4-wheel drive could cover it in 10 minutes. Snapping off the monitor, he turned to Marissa, who sat near the fire with Lily and Rose nestled in her arms. "Marissa, listen to me." His voice was low and decisive. "Someone's coming. We don't have much time." Her eyes widened. "Is it Brian?" "Most likely." Tom was already helping her into a heavy coat, looping a thick wool scarf around her neck. "You need to take the girls out the back door now." She froze mid-step. "What about you?" He was already striding toward the storage cabinet. "I'm staying. I've got a plan to draw them off. Buy you time." But Marissa, his hand closed gently but firmly on her shoulder. "I will not let them touch you or the girls. Take the back trail, 3 miles, and you'll reach Sam Keller's place. I trust him completely. Knock 3 times on his barn door. He'll open it." She swallowed hard and nodded. Outside, the wind clawed at the night. Tom guided her to the rear porch, pointing out the narrow trail he'd shoveled earlier that morning. He pressed a small flashlight into her hand, its beam dim enough not to give her away from a distance. "Hold the girls tight. Don't stop, no matter what you hear behind you." Marissa drew in a breath, clutching Lily against her chest. Rose secured on her back in a thick carrier. Their eyes met one last time, his steady and warm, a silent promise. Then she stepped out into the blinding white, her figure swallowed almost instantly by the snow. Tom headed for the garage, pulling the tarp off his black Polaris ATV. The engine roared to life, cutting through the wind. With the SUVs still a ways off, he sped east toward the mountain road loop. His high beams cut a glaring swath through the storm, a moving beacon impossible to miss. From the cameras, he saw 2 of the SUVs break off and veer toward him. The third kept creeping toward the lodge, but that was a risk he'd calculated. The fewer that tailed Marissa, the safer she'd be. Snow stung his face like shards of ice, crusting over his goggles. He pushed the machine hard, weaving through narrow passes only someone who'd lived here for years would know. The trail pitched into a slick incline, and he aimed for it, counting on the steepness and the frozen surface to slow his pursuers. Behind him, engines snarled, headlights flashing between the trees, flickers of light sweeping across the snow, but he held his speed, keeping the gap wide. Meanwhile, Marissa fought through the storm, each step sinking deep into the snow. Every stride cost her, but the warmth of the 2 little bodies pressed to her kept her moving. The wind screamed in her ears, but she listened. No engine noise, no crunch of boots behind her. Tom's plan was working. She knew with chilling certainty. Without him, she and the twins would already be cornered. After nearly 20 minutes, Tom looped back along a hidden cut in the woods. Through the trees, he saw the 2 SUVs struggling on the slope, tires spinning helplessly. Killing his lights, he turned toward Sam Keller's property, hoping Marissa had made it. When the barn came into view, golden light spilled from its doorway. A tall figure, Sam, stood at the entrance with a shotgun cradled in his arms. Inside, Marissa was huddled on a hay bale, the twins wrapped close, her cheeks flushed from cold, but her eyes lighting up at the sight of Tom. He stepped in and shut the door behind him, letting the wind die outside. For the first time that night, he exhaled. "You did great," he said, his voice rough from the cold. Marissa looked at him, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Thank you for not leaving us," he answered with a brief nod. No more needed to be said because he already knew he'd do it again, as many times as it took, until they were truly safe. The mountain sky was a slate gray that morning, thick clouds hanging low over the valley like slabs of stone. The air was unnervingly still, no wind whispering through the pines, no bird song. In the wooden kitchen, Marissa cradled Lily and Rose close, smoothing their fine hair, but her eyes betrayed the unease pressing at her chest. In the living room, Tom sat before the security monitor, flipping through the feeds from the cameras around Sam Keller's property. Then the image from the main gate froze him mid-breath. Against the white expanse of snow, 4 black SUVs crept uphill in a slow, deliberate line. Tires ground through the ice, leaving long gray tracks behind. His brows drew together, His voice dropped low, almost a growl under his breath. "He's here." Marissa's head snapped up. The words hit her like a punch, squeezing the air from her lungs. She clutched the girls tighter, instinct screaming for her to find cover. But before she could move, Tom was already on his feet, unlocking the front door. He stepped out onto the porch, his broad frame blocking the view from inside. The deep rumble of engines grew closer. The lead SUV skidded to a stop just shy of the steps, spraying shards of ice across the porch. The door swung open. Brian stepped out. He wore a long black coat, the collar turned up to hide part of his face, but his eyes, sharp, glinting with malice, were plain to see. A crooked half-smile tugged at his lips, not in joy, but in twisted satisfaction at seeing a familiar face under these circumstances. "Well, well." His voice was growly, drawn out. "Didn't expect to find you all the way up in this mountain hole." Tom stood unmoving, eyes calm but deep, like a lake before a storm. "This time, Brian, you're not getting the ending you want." Brian laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "I'm here to take my wife home. This is between us. It doesn't concern you. She's not your property," Tom said evenly, "and you'll never touch her or the children again." Brian stepped closer, voice low, but dripping with threat. "You always did like playing the hero, but you remember. We've worked together before. You know what I'm capable of." "I also know exactly what kind of man you are," Tom said, his tone cutting. "And I'm not letting you walk away this time." 4 bodyguards climbed out behind Brian, broad shoulders, cold eyes, fanning out into a semicircle, their presence pressed forward like a black wall. From just behind the cracked door, Marissa's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The sight of Brian made her whole body tremble, her knuckles whitening around the girls. Brian's gaze slid to the door, lips curling. "She's in there, isn't she? Why wait? Hand her over." Tom folded his arms, planted like a pillar in a storm. "No." The air thickened. One guard moved in, trying to shove Tom aside. Tom caught the man's arm and shoved him back a step. 2 more closed in from the sides. Brian advanced, pulling a pistol from his coat. The black barrel aimed square at Tom's chest. "Move. Don't make me hurt you." Tom's gaze didn't flicker. "If it's between getting hurt and letting you near them, I'll take the hit." Marissa couldn't stay hidden. She stepped into the open, holding her daughters tight. Her face was pale, but her eyes locked on Brian. Fear and fury mingled. "Get back inside." Tom's voice cracked like a command. Brian's eyes narrowed, his grin turning cruel. "She still listens to you. Interesting." One guard lunged, grabbing for Tom's arm. Tom pivoted, dropped his weight, and wrenched free, sending the man stumbling. Another fist slammed into his ribs, knocking the breath from him, but his boot stayed rooted in the snow. Brian surged forward, smashing the pistol's butt into Tom's shoulder. Something tore in the muscle with a sharp crack. Pain knifed down his arm, warm blood beginning to seep beneath his coat. Still, Tom didn't give ground. He shoved Brian's wrist hard, knocking the barrel offline, then twisted sharply, forcing him to loosen his grip on the gun. The porch erupted in chaos, boots slipping on ice. Harsh breathing, grunts of effort, the thud of bodies against the wood. Brian stepped back, smirking. "You really think you can stop me, Granger?" Tom's breath was ragged, red drops staining the snow. "Long enough to finish this?" A sudden wail of sirens split the air. Down the slope, red and blue lights strobed through the trees. A police SUV slid to a stop, tires shrieking on the ice, followed by a silver pickup. Sheriff Hank Morgan stepped out first, massive frame steady, hand near his sidearm. Behind him came Lucas, Tom's closest friend, carrying a thick folder. "Brian Quinn." Hank's voice boomed. "Drop the weapon. Hands where I can see them." Brian whirled, eyes blazing. "You have no Lucas," cut him off, his tone steel hard. "We have a warrant for your arrest on 3 counts. Felony domestic assault, making credible threats to life, and contract fraud." He held up the papers. Evidence includes photographs of Marissa's injuries, threatening messages, witness testimony, and records of fraud in the real estate project you ran with Tom. Color drained from Brian's face, his grip on the pistol tightened like he might gamble at all, but Hank already had his gun drawn. 3 deputies spreading out in a tightening ring. The silence was knife-sharp. Then came the hard clink of metal on ice as the pistol dropped. Handcuffs snapped shut around Brian's wrist. the cold steel clicking like a final period. As they marched him toward the patrol car, he turned once more, hate and frustration burning in his stare at Tom and Marissa. The mountain wind swept through again, carrying the scent of pine and the faint smoke from Sam's fireplace. Marissa stepped fully onto the porch, holding the girls tighter as she saw the dark stain spreading on Tom's coat. "You're hurt." Her voice shook, worry cutting through every syllable. Tom managed a faint smile, his skin pale. "Just a scratch. Worth it if it means you're all safe." Her lips trembled, eyes bright with tears. "I owe you so much." He shook his head. "No debt. My choice." They stood there against the snow. No vows spoken, but both knowing the truth. From this day on, no one would ever lay a hand on her or the girls again. Morning snow still fell in scattered flurries, but nothing like the blizzard of the day before. A thin sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling a pale gold over Sam's front yard. On the snow, faint smears of diluted red spread outward before being whisked away by the wind, remnants of a storm that had passed. Tom sat in a wooden chair by the fireplace. His coat was off, revealing a thick sweater, the left shoulder stained with blood. He sat still while Marissa disinfected the wound and wrapped it in fresh bandages. "You don't have to fuss so much," Tom said softly, lips tilting into something meant to reassure her. "I've had worse than this." Marissa looked up at him, her eyes a blend of reproach and care. "But this time, it was because of us." Tom started to respond, but she bent her head again, concentrating on her work. Her hands were gentle but steady as she wound the bandage carefully over his shoulder. When she tied the last knot, she lifted her gaze to meet his. "You didn't owe us anything, Tom. No one forced you to stay, but you chose to all the way to the end." The firelight painted his face, casting sharp, warm lines across features that were both strong and kind. Tom was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. "There are some people. You just don't walk away from Marissa," he said, voice low but sure. "And you and those girls are those people." Her lips pressed together, holding back tears. It had been far too long since she'd heard words that settled her heart like that. In the days that followed, there were no strange engines grinding up the slope, no shadows lingering at the gate. News from the city confirmed that Brian was in custody. His lawyer's repeated bail requests denied outright. Lucas called often, walking Marissa through every step to prepare for trial. He reminded her to keep all evidence, photographs of bruises, neighbors' statements about hearing arguments, and the threatening messages Brian had sent. Tom wasn't content to stay on the sidelines. He worked with Lucas to uncover more documents from the real estate fraud years earlier, proof that Brian had siphoned funds. Layered alongside the abuse charges, the case became even harder to defend. The trial opened on a late winter morning. Marissa sat in the witness stand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Brian was led in, his wrist still cuffed. He wore a dark suit, but his eyes were full of venom when they slid over her. The prosecutor laid out the case piece by piece. Photos of bruises on Marissa's wrists, shoulders, and back filled the large display screen. Threatening text messages were read aloud. Marissa trembled slightly at hearing the words again, but kept her chin up. From the gallery, Tom's gaze was steady, as if lending her his strength. When the judge finally spoke, custody of the minors Lily and Rose is awarded to Marissa Quinn. The defendant, Brian Quinn, is permanently prohibited from any contact with the victim and her children. The gavel's crack echoed sharp and final. Marissa exhaled as if a boulder had been lifted from her chest. Brian shouted something, but his words were drowned by the hum of voices in the courtroom. Officers led him out, and this time, Marissa felt no fear. That afternoon, they returned to the wooden lodge in the forest. Stepping from the car, Marissa drew in a deep breath of pine and snow. The twins were asleep in their car seats. Tom opened the door, waiting for her to go in first. The fireplace was already lit, its glow much like the night they'd first met. But now there was no wind clawing at the walls. No threat at the door, only peace. Setting her bag down, Marissa turned to him. "We're free now." Tom gave a small nod, his eyes soft. "And we always will be." In that moment there was no need for more words. Everything that mattered was held in the quiet warmth between them. Outside, the sky was clearing. After the storm, everything seemed sharper, not just the view above the mountains, but the road ahead for Marissa, her daughters, and Tom. Spring came late to the mountains. Snow melted slowly, leaving patches of white on the hillsides, but the first wild flowers had begun to bloom. The gentle murmur of a small stream spilled over the rocks, blending with the birds calling to each other in the pine forest. Tom's wooden lodge, once a secluded retreat, now glowed with light almost every evening. On the porch, pots of flowers Marissa had planted sat beside a few herbs for cooking. The yard was neatly kept with a small play area, complete with a swing and a wooden slide Tom had built with his own hands. Since the storm had passed, they decided to open a small home, hosting only a few guests at a time to preserve the peaceful atmosphere. There was no flashy advertising. Most visitors came seeking to disconnect from the rush of city life. Marissa took charge of the kitchen and hosted weekend cooking classes. Inside, the air was rich with the aroma of fresh bread, hot soup, or apple pie. She often wore an apron, teaching guests while keeping an eye on Lily and Rose, now able to hold onto chairs or tables as they took their first unsteady steps. Lily, quicker on her feet, often toddled after her mother, wide-eyed with curiosity. Rose was more reserved, clinging to her mother's leg, but when Tom called, she would smile and reach out to be picked up. "Ma cake," Lily said, her words not yet perfect, but her eyes sparkling. "That's right, sweetheart. Mama's cake." Marissa bent to pat her daughter's hair. Tom often helped by holding one of the girls so Marissa could work freely. He'd grown used to talking with guests while tiny hands clung tightly to his shirt. Outside of the kitchen, Tom offered woodworking lessons and guided mountain hikes. He showed guests how to saw, hammer, and sand smooth. They loved the simple yet sturdy items he made: picture frames, folding chairs, and bookshelves. Sometimes Lily and Rose played nearby under their mother's watchful eye. They loved watching wood shavings fall, always eager to touch them, but Tom's voice would turn firm. "No princesses, this wood isn't for playing." Rose would wrinkle her nose and step back while Lily burst out laughing. Each night after the guests had gone to their rooms, Tom and Marissa would sit on the porch. The children slept, and the golden porch light cast a gentle glow. The night wind carried the scent of pine, the hum of insects, and sometimes the distant howl of a wolf. One such evening, Marissa brought out 2 mugs of hot cocoa. Tom was sanding the edge of a high chair for the girls. "Do you think this chair is safe enough?" she asked. "Almost. The girls are active. It needs to be as sturdy as possible." He looked up and smiled. Marissa sat opposite him, watching for a long moment. In the warm light, his features were both strong and gentle. "Tom," her voice was soft as the wind, "you chose us when you could have just walked away." Tom set down his tools, wiped his hands on a cloth, and stepped closer. "I still choose you, Marissa, every day." She smiled, eyes misting, not from sadness, but from the kind of happiness that brings tears. That weekend, they hosted an outdoor dinner for the guests. A long table was set under the pines, covered in white cloth, adorned with candles and warm golden string lights. Marissa served herb-roasted chicken, fresh salad, and warm bread from the oven. Tom manned the grill and shared mountain stories with their guests. Lily and Rose sat in their high chairs, patting the trays and babbling, "Dumb, eat." Laughter rippled along the table. A guest leaned toward Marissa and whispered, "They're adorable. This place, it feels like a home." After dinner, everyone gathered around the fire pit, listening to the crackle of burning wood under a sky full of stars. Lily yawned, burying her face into Tom's shoulder, while Rose fell asleep in her mother's lap. That night, after the guests were settled, Tom locked the doors and checked the alarm system. Marissa tucked Rose into bed, covered both girls with blankets, then stepped back out to the porch. The lodge glowed warmly in the middle of the forest. Light poured from the windows like a promise, a reminder that here everyone was safe. Tom draped a light blanket over her shoulders. "It's cold. Come inside." Marissa leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think we've built ourselves a family." He squeezed her shoulder gently, his gaze on the warmly lit windows. "Not just a family, Marissa, a new life." They stood there without rings, without flowery boughs, only warmth, light, and the quiet decision to choose each other.